Nervous before the big game? Could some stressed athletes perform better with a gentle jolt through their ears? Crops keep our food supply going, and it's the root systems that keep plants growing. One scientist is looking for ways to reduce the need for fertilizers by making roots better. And the plastic problem in our oceans. A young researcher is on a quest to clean it up, even if that means going to some gross places. That's coming up next on Catalyst. This YouTube edition of Catalyst is brought to you by Arizona PBS and Arizona State University. Life has problems. Science turns them into questions that can lead to solutions and even innovations. This is Catalyst, shaping the future through science research at Arizona State University. Next time you're in the grocery store, count how many plastic bags you fill at the checkout line. Or at lunch, notice how often your drink comes with a straw. I'm Professor Vanessa Ruiz, and welcome to Catalyst. Decades of discarded plastics are just about everywhere in our oceans. Tonight, you will meet an Arizona State University researcher who's working to understand the scope of the problem by studying what's going into animals and what's coming out. PhD student Charlie Rolski is pretty unconventional in just about all aspects of his life, whether it's out on the water or in front of a classroom of kids.
What do you think that is? Plastic.
When teaching kids about plastics found in the ocean, he gets their hands dirty sifting bits of it from sand pouring into a bucket.
Ooh, look at that.
He found that sand out here on the ocean floor while hunting for killer whales. Not with a weapon, but with Tucker, a rescue dog specially trained to scan for whale clues.
The organisms are going one direction and the wind's going this way, so you kind of go back and forth. It's called a transect until the dog cues on something, and then when it cues, he shakes his butt and gets all excited, and once you see it, you freak out, you throw something in the water that floats so you can remember where it is.
It was not the whale he was freaking out about, but rather what it left behind.
It's really hard to study animals in the ocean because they just surface for a little bit. So with endangered species, you're not allowed to get within 200 yards, making it really difficult to do anything. So fecal analysis is really important because if you're studying stress hormones, you don't want to get right next to an organism and stress it out. So you could be a fair distance away and you have to find the fecal samples.
Simply put, Rolski hunts for whale poop, and he has made a name as a scientist analyzing it.
To see what hormones are present, you can look at the DNA of what they're eating. You'll see a lot of sand and plant matter, all very green, pretty colors. And then you'll see something that's bright blue or bright red, and then you know that shouldn't be there. You shouldn't have those really pretty colors.
When inspected under a microscope, there are bits of microplastics, and for every speck he sees, he knows there are millions more he can't.
Oh, these are gross. The analysis that we do, we can look at something as small as a micron. It's usually around 5 millimeters or less in terms of the size of a microplastic. But a lot of these plastics are between 20, 30, over 100 years old, a lot of them, because it takes so long for them to break down.
After decades of exposure to the sun and the salt water, the plastic breaks down into micron-sized bits until it is in an elemental state as plasticizer or phthalate, the chemical that binds plastic.
The plastic can accumulate toxins and chemicals at really high concentrations, which is really dangerous, so it kind of acts as a vehicle to transport them at really high concentrations. A lot of these contaminants are called endocrine disruptors, meaning they mess with your hormones. And if it's a developing individual, there's a problem there because it could potentially alter the development.
The problem is growing as islands of plastic waste float off near and distant shores.
It is crazy because I'll see pictures of a beach that's really heavily contaminated, and it's maybe a beach of a country that doesn't sell those products or anything close to those products. So when we did the surveys of the crabs, we found these concentrated in the stomach. Now that's a problem because that's a way for it to move up the food chain, right? Crab, fish, sea lion, shark, it's moving all the way up, and it's getting more concentrated as it goes higher and higher.
Ultimately, Rolski says those concentrations of phthalates may end up in the seafood you serve for dinner.
There's a fragment here.
While collecting the samples is difficult, Rolski says convincing people that there is a real threat is just as tough.
But it's really hard, when you have a dramatic picture of a sperm whale that's eating all these plastic bags because they look like jellyfish. That's obviously you see that and you're like, how do you prove something this small is bad? So that's what's really hard to do. And given an ecosystem like the ocean, that's even harder. It's really hard to replicate this in a lab. You can't really bring the ocean to Arizona.
With help from friends, Roski is selling t-shirts to raise awareness.
At first, it was just cool because we could donate the money, and then all of a sudden, people would email me and say, I live in Spain, and I walk the beaches with my daughter, and I see plastic trash all the time.
Roski says it gave him an idea to expand the research on the ocean to the shores, where an army of people can voluntarily send him samples of waste and debris found on beaches from all around the world.
Now I'm reaching all these people through social media, which I'm terrible at, by the way. And now I think we're at 14 or 15 countries we've gotten plastic samples from, just based on this silly idea initially. It was just this fun thing.
But by getting the public, especially children, involved, he is finding an unconventional way to clean up a monumental mess.
Who wants to be a crab? All kids love whales and dolphins. I always tell parents to take their kids to the ocean, look at the beach, look at the trash. Try to figure out if you can make them see that invisible connection to the ocean.
When Charlie Roski landed the internship for whale research with the University of Washington, it took him far out of the lab into the ocean that he loves. But his work continues here on the ASU campus and is made possible by the extraordinary relationships he's made along the way. If Roski's story seems familiar, you may have seen him in one of ASU's national commercials. He gives a lot of the credit for getting into ASU's Biodesign Institute as a PhD student to this man, Rolf Halden.
Well, we see a lot of students here at Arizona State University, and it's a privilege to work with each one. They're all different, and they all bring their own history and motivation. I particularly am interested in people who have an interest in health and the environment, a genuine interest that will carry them through the highs and the lows in their research and in their education as well.
Growing up, Roski lived along the Pacific coast.
I knew I wanted to learn more about science. I didn't really make the connection to being a scientist until I worked on a boat with killer whales, and you sort of see a beautiful animal, you see the data, and when you make that connection between something negative within the animal's physiology and seeing the animal so beautiful, that's when I realized I need to make a difference here. This is bad. So far, so good. It's dirty.
But Roski admits he wasn't an A+ student.
As an undergrad, I struggled. I had a medical issue. I tried to balance too many things at once, and I ended up having to take time off. So I had to pay the bills, and I ended up working a 40 to 50 hour a week job in a market on campus. I kind of realized at that point I need to not do this anymore. It changed everything for me, and I wanted to go back to school, and I realized I need to finish this.
He did his research and knew he wanted to study under renowned bio-waste expert Halden, but he feared his grades and time off would keep him out of the running as a doctoral candidate.
It looks like it's probably polypropylene.
But then he trusted his gut and asked Halden to lunch.
I saw that there was a true passion, and he also shared with me that he had tried different avenues of advancing his education and had hit some kind of dead ends along the way. So it was important for him to find something and make progress. And I could relate to that. I also kind of meandered through the sciences, starting in biology and moving to engineering.
Halden recognized that desire and potential and invited Roski to join his world-class research team.
One great thing about Charlie is that he's just a kind of a very social being, and so it's easy for him to approach others, to talk to others. It's not only productive in terms of making connections, but it's also essential to communicate the message that we have and share it with as broad an audience as possible.
For Roski, the admiration is mutual towards Professor Halden.
He's taught me more than anyone in the academic field ever has, just by introducing me to these concepts and seeing things creatively. And he's a great example of having all these different qualities and attributes and using them all academically. So being creative, being focused, being funny, being driven, having a high intellect and passion. And seeing big picture.
Tucker, you gotta get real excited that you smell something.
In return for his mentorship, Halden asked only that Roski pay it forward and help future scientists.
Without looking at me, where do you think the smell came from? Right there, exactly. Good. Okay, awesome.
Whether that's tutoring school children or mentoring undergrads, Roski says he never forgets what it's like to be in their shoes.
Now I really relate when students come to me and they have struggles. I see myself in them, and I can tell them exactly, this is how you can overcome it.
Roski believes with empathy toward their cause, it is likely they will find empathy with his.
And in that manner, people will sort of look around more and maybe think, you know, I probably shouldn't throw this in the trash, or, oh, you know, I'll bring my own water bottle in, or I'll get takeout food, and since I'm eating at home with silverware, I won't ask for plastic silverware, you know.
And slowly but steadily, the tide will change.
Charlie is well on his way to making important contributions, you know, to society.
More than 10,000 years ago, the agricultural revolution marked the evolution of humans from hunter-gatherers to settlement builders. As the world population continues to increase and city centers expand, it is imperative that farmers find new ways to grow crops more efficiently. Scientific advances in genetic engineering have increased crop yields, but public perception of the technology is still mixed. One Arizona State University scientist hopes that his work with GMOs will help consumers better understand the benefits. He is modifying genes already present in plants.
In this case, I think what we're doing is molecular domestication. We're increasing the expression of a gene that is present in every single plant.
Farmers have naturally transformed the genes of plants over thousands of years by cultivating only the best plants from each crop. Selective breeding is responsible for the corn you see in the grocery store, and that corn is very different from the small grass of its origin. Gagiola wants to take a more direct approach to this process by modifying plants so that they will require less fertilizer. Farmers have been using chemical fertilizers for more than 100 years and rely on them to increase overall yields.
If you go to the supermarket, you like to buy very nice plants that look beautiful and nice, no? And well, for that you need to put a lot of phosphate. Without phosphate, there is no agriculture. Without agriculture, there is no people.
Gagiola explains why fertilizer has had an unintended effect on plants beneath the soil.
We are in part guilty of the problem. We develop plants that were able to grow in abundance of nitrate and phosphate, for example. And by doing so, we make lazy roots. The roots don't grow much. Why? Because we feed them, we feed them in the mouth. Now we give them all the excess of phosphate and nitrate and whatever.
Because plants are not able to absorb all of the fertilizer, the leftover nutrients are washed into rivers and streams. They eventually flow into the oceans, where there are serious and unintended consequences.
When algae get phosphate and nitrate like crazy, they say, wow, we have CO2, we have light, they grow like crazy, no? Eventually, as everybody, algae also die. And then when they die, they sink. So bacteria love it because it's food.
When bacteria eat dead algae, they deplete the oxygen levels in the water, which can cause large-scale fish and plant die-off, transforming whole areas into dead zones. Gagiola has developed a gene modification for plants that may lower the amount of fertilizer farmers need to spray on their fields. His target, the roots.
In order to improve their capacity of taking up nutrients and water, plants move sugar that they make through photosynthesis down to the root system. So they develop larger and more active root systems that help them to take water and nutrients. So what we're doing is trying to see how can we improve that process. A gene has three major components. One is the promoter region that actually decides how much of the gene is going to be produced. The other one is the gene itself, where you have the coding region, and then you have a terminator, not to stop the transcription. What we're doing is changing the information for the production of the protein, and we're increasing the abundance of the protein in the plant.
This protein moves the necessary molecules to create stronger roots, and stronger roots make the plants more efficient gatherers of nutrients in the soil. Gagiola's method helps plants to grow faster with less fertilizer.
So if you can actually generate crops that now are better miners, you might actually be able to produce higher yields even under marginal conditions.
Arizona soils are actually high in phosphate. They have quite high residual levels of phosphate, but oftentimes it becomes unavailable to the plant. We do tissue testing on all of our crops a couple of times during the year, and we have seen some low levels of phosphate in some of our wheat. And even in alfalfa, alfalfa is a heavy user of phosphate. So we do fertilize it at least twice a year to try to keep the phosphate levels up and make it available to the plant. The idea that you could modify the roots to be more aggressive in seeking out phosphate or phosphorus in the soil to feed the plant is kind of an interesting concept. It would help the plant make sure that it always had the available phosphate that the plant needs for maximum production. And the other thing is that hopefully you could buy less phosphate fertilizer. Fertilizers with phosphate in it are some of the highest priced fertilizers per ton. They're much higher than a ton of nitrogen, for instance.
Although Gajila's work can provide a real benefit, GMOs are still unpopular with some commercial buyers and retail consumers.
We grow plants that have been genetically modified, and we have for over 20 years. It's been a fantastic deal for us. I mean, it has led to the implementation of other very sustainable projects. We can produce our cotton now in a very sustainable format where we rarely spray the cotton at all today, and we're using much less water to grow the crop. There's nothing that I can see that we gave up by having those plants.
It could be used tomorrow. The technology is available. It has worked in 14 different cultivars. So we're talking cotton, we're talking tomato, we're talking rice, corn, wheat. But the limiting factor is still the same, acceptance. If you Google GMOs, you're going to find like 70% of the notes are negative. And if you scratch a little bit those notes, you're going to realize that a bunch of lies. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't scratch farther.
From plant modification to behavior modification, for many competitive athletes, severe performance anxiety prevents them from performing at their best. But what if there was a device that could manage stress and alleviate anxiety? Would it be fair to use in competition?
It's a very simple sport that we make very difficult because we get in our own way. You're going to pull an arrow out of your quiver and you're going to knock it. So you're going to place your fingers on the string and your hand in the bow. That's where your mental game really kicks in at that point. Then you're going to lift the bow and you're going to draw to your anchor. At the point that you're at full draw and you're starting to expand and the sight is on the target, you're just be. When you shoot an amazing arrow, it's just this great feeling of being in the zone, and you can't, it's just, there's nothing like it.
The perfect arrow can be very difficult to shoot, even if you're one of the best archers in the world.
So I was at the 81 World Championships, and I saw the woman that won the Olympic Games. She was Russian. Just all this emotion came out, like, I want to show her. And that is never a good place to shoot from, is that I want to show you. And I totally failed. That's the first memory I can have of target panic. Target panic is the worst form of getting in your own way. The ego is trying so hard to be something and to get credit and to, it's huge and it's flashing. And when you get up there to shoot the arrow, your mind just blocks. Sometimes I was in charge. Other times I wasn't.
Whether or not an athlete is in charge is often the difference between winning and losing. But now, a small startup born at Arizona State University may have a solution to help nervous athletes from around the world.
We develop drug-free technologies that block the effects of stress and optimize human performance. Specifically, the device that we are working with is a pair of earbuds that use a technology called vagus nerve stimulation. If you think of the nerve kind of like a tree, you've got the trunk of the tree that goes up the side of your neck, and you've got all these branches that kind of branch out that are all throughout your ears. And you simply put these electrodes in your ears, just like a standard pair of earbuds for music, and then you use small electric impulses to activate this nerve called the vagus nerve that, when activated, it instantly lowers heart rate, and it just helps you relax.
While vagus nerve stimulators like this have been available to consumers for some time now, Hool wanted to cater specifically to athletes with an easy-to-use device.
My goal was I wanted to find which technology is most practical to help athletes reduce stress or get in the zone or optimize their performance. So I grew up playing competitive golf, and my dream was to play on the PGA Tour. My last year in high school was kind of the year that I needed to play really well so I can commit to go to a college. And just for whatever reason, I stopped playing well. All of a sudden I noticed that my heart's just beating and just pounding out of my chest. And I couldn't control it. It was terrible. Because it's not like my physical talent went away, but for whatever reason, my performance was really poor. What if, we could understand where exactly in the brain this performance anxiety originates? And then can we stick this device up there and shut it off for, an hour at a time?
I look at the vagus nerve stimulation as a proactive approach to settling, right, before you're going to compete. I was able in this new part of my life to sort of train away that target panic using a headset like that to focus me on the process and what I was doing.
This new breed of wearable technology shows potential to reduce anxiety and boost performance among competitive athletes. But this also raises some ethical concerns. Beta blockers, a heart medication that have similar anxiety-reducing benefits, are banned in the Olympics. Would this new technology be considered cheating?
The word cheater, some people will say. The person who never has any nerves, never has any problem, loves to compete, for them, anything's cheating because nothing's hard for them. But now the ethical question really is, who is the best athlete? Is the best athlete the one who just naturally was born with all of that? Or is the best athlete who searches for every possible answer to be able to shoot the best arrows? And I think the way that I'm wired is I would want to use the vagus nerve to learn how to do that, to learn that I can be in charge. Because that's always the reason I wanted to shoot archery, was to be in charge.
Even while athletes argue over the use of vagus nerve stimulation, it may have the potential to change lives outside of sports by treating the symptoms of general anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder.
My hope is that within a year, we'll be selling to athletes everywhere. And then once we have some revenue, we want to go down the FDA route and get cleared to treat real medical anxiety, as well as other markets like PTSD and opioid withdrawal treatment.
I'm Professor Vanessa Ruiz, and thank you for watching Catalyst, our show about shaping the future, how research creates real-life results. And because our lives have new problems that science can solve, we'll be back soon with more stories.
Catalyst is supported by Knowledge Enterprise Development at Arizona State University, advancing entrepreneurship, innovation, discovery, and knowledge for the public good.
Subscribe to this channel to see more episodes of Catalyst on YouTube.